Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of the Jomba MASIHAMBISANE Dialogues. We had a beautiful first day yesterday, and for those who missed out, remember you can go and access the conversations on the YouTube channel. But we set out on day 2, and we have a morning of extraordinary encounters with artists and practitioners. And particularly one of the things that the MASIHAMBISANE Dialogues wants to do is to really engage the idea of practice is research. And we feel that in order to really understand what's going on in the world and what's going on in terms of artists' own zeitgeist is to have these amazing conversations with artists. And today, just to kickstart today, where we are kind of provocation or theme for the day is the liminality of betwixt and between, a kind of and but. And they thought there would be no one better than Robyn Orlin to kickstart this morning with us. I don't really think Robyn needs an introduction, but I'm going to offer her a little bit of an introduction because you can read more in the brochure. But as many of you know, Robyn was born in Johannesburg, but now lives in Berlin. She trained at the London School of Contemporary Dance and then at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. She began her career as a dancer, choreographer, and a teacher in South Africa. And her work immediately got noticed because of, I think, what is sometimes called in her CV, the singularity of her choreography. But it's also about the glorious chaos that reigns in her creations. Her prize-winning, multiple award-winning piece, Daddy, I've seen this piece 6 times before, and I still don't know why they're hurting each other, a piece she made in 1998, which really mocked the difficulties and the shortcomings of a young South African, I think maybe slightly a prophetic work. It also she also takes on classical ballet as a kind of vector of discrimination, but the work enabled her to tour Europe, and it really brought her a lot of international recognition. And since then, France particularly has been a very strong creative territory for her. But at the same time, she continues to keep her feet very firmly planted in South Africa and continues to work in South Africa, where she's worked with companies like Via Katlehong and quite often and quite significantly with moving into dance. And more recently with the Garage Dance Ensemble in the Eastern Cape, and we're going to talk a little bit about that project a little bit later. But really the kind of cosmos or the world of Robyn is really trademarked by a very political engagement with dance, choreography, with meaning making, and also the lovely reoccurrence of these kind of iconic objects, which are really like the tutu oranges. And of course, I want to talk a little bit about the ducks. I've even got a little plastic duck that I once got as an audience member in one of your works. It sits on my bookshelf. Robyn has also been named as the legacy artist, the Jomba legacy artist for 2024, and we are going to be very happy to welcome her back into South Africa and to Jomba, both in Durban and at the Market Theatre later for the Jomba Festival. So, Robyn, I feel like I could talk about you all day, but we're here to hear you speak. I want to just say welcome.
Hi. Thank you for those great words.
Well, it's lovely to have you. And I'm going to jump right in because our time is short, and I think there's so much to talk about with your work. And one of the things that emerged yesterday, and it was a provocation that was created by Bongeni Charlie, he spoke about, because the theme of the colloquium is this kind of, in brackets, return to the drum. And he spoke a little bit about the drum as being this kind of almost metaphor of the kind of the skin of the outside and the inside. And I found that really interesting because also you have mediated lots of different spaces and places. So I'm jumping right in. And, at the height of your career, you left South Africa to go and live in Germany. And obviously, this must have impacted your work and made you think about yourself in kind of different ways. As a South African, as someone with feet in Europe and in Africa. And I'm wondering how this has affected your sense of identity and maybe influenced the way you make work.
Well, that's a very long question and a very hard question. I mean, my husband and I left for Germany with the idea we were coming back after 5 years. My husband, Oliver Schmitz, just wanted to finish a project that he had done in Germany. And I was very surprised when we just never came back. So it was, for me, it was definitely not a choice to leave. What did you ask me? I don't know where to start.
Kind of mediations of your identity. I mean, what does it mean to be aware? Because your work is so viscerally about South Africa and about your context, and yet you're not living.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, I've really struggled to find a voice that means something to me that I want to share with anybody else in Europe of how I'm feeling about Europe. I will say this, that when I'm in South Africa, I have the conflict and the conflict of being a white African. And when I am in Europe, Germany, France, or anywhere in Europe, actually, I have to deal with being Jewish, the history of what it means to be Jewish, which I never really, I mean, I did confront, and when I was very young, had a lot of exposure to by my parents. My parents used to send me at the age of 8. I was already complicated then, so they just kicked me out of the house when I was 8 in the summer, and they would send me to this Jewish camp in Onras in Hermanus, and we would live in tents for 3 weeks, and I used to love it. But it was it was a Jewish organization that was very political. That asked questions about what it meant to be Jewish, even at the age of 8, what it meant to be Jewish in South Africa. So a lot wiped off me from a very young age. It's very hard. It's incredibly hard to find an identity for myself at the moment. When people say to me, "Where do you live?" And sometimes I just say, "On an aeroplane." Because my German is atrocious, because I'm never in Germany. I'm either in South Africa or France, working in South Africa or France. I struggle to come to terms with Germany and its history, and with Europe and its history, in terms of what Europe did to Africa, which I'm not going to get into now, but it's been really, really difficult, and I haven't really found an identity. I can't. It's too difficult, because I will always be South African. I think the older you get, the older one gets, one starts reflecting on one's past. And my memories are in South Africa. The rickshaws are in South Africa. What is beauty is a question in South Africa. So there are all these, that phantom was my husband. So there are all these, and at the moment, I'm really, I'm full of memories of when I was young, and asking myself questions. I mean, I haven't stopped asking myself questions living in Europe, but asking myself questions about how I felt when I was young, because now's the time to actually talk about those feelings, because I'm getting old, and there's there's this space to do it in. So I have to come back to South Africa. I have to come back to where it all started. I mean, I'm first generation South African, but it's Africa is where I come from. I had to apply for a German passport because it was just getting too complicated, waiting 2 years to get a new South African passport from South Africa. So I said, fuck this, I'm going to go and get a German passport. And one of the laws is that you have to give up your because I don't have any German heritage. I'm just married to a German. I have to give up my South African passport. And I kept on going to the South African embassy. And this poor guy at the embassy, he was giving me therapy. I kept saying, should I do it or shouldn't I do it? I can't, I can't let go. I can't. And eventually, he said to me, look, he's married to a German woman. He's living in Berlin. He probably had to give up his South African, even though he still works for the South African embassy. And he says, you'll always be South African, Robyn.
Yeah.
So it's been a very big wound that hasn't healed yet.
That passport is really a signifier, right?
Well, for
Of
me it
belonging.
is. For me it is. All the many moments where you have to get visas because South Africans are not accepted anywhere, really, in the world. That's fallen by the wayside, but the sadness is still there. And I think
it's interesting. I mean, also listening to you talk in a way, I mean, this notion of complex identities, of whiteness, of belonging. I mean, I think about, the Salman Rushdie writes a lot about the nature of an artist, and he has such an interesting idea. He always says that to be an artist in a contemporary world is to constantly be in a state of exile. And he said, you are always journeying to a mythical sense of home. And I just suddenly remembered that and felt the resonances listening to you talk
and
about.
I call you every day. Can you remind me?
You can totally.
Oh, that because it's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And it's a reminder that perhaps the artistic project is one that you've got to both be rooted, but you've also got to be critical, and you've got to, and as an artist who makes deeply political work. So on that note, I wanted to also, I'm interested because I know your history as a ballet dancer and that you've taken on ballet. I kind of, maybe I'm projecting, but I kind of love hate. But I know certainly in the earlier works, I remembered, I can't remember the name of the work. I was trying to think about it last night, but you had a row of men and women in tutus with mics breathing their breath into the mic, asking for chocolates. It was just kind of, for me, also as a white South African girl growing up during apartheid, with ballet as the only option of training. But I'm interested because you've used ballet as a way of negotiating a kind of political attack on that kind of apartheid South Africa, and that sense of how ballet became almost symbolic for you at an earlier stage of a way of thinking about whiteness and about politics. And I just want, it kind of fascinates me, and also in the light of having spoken with Dada yesterday, who so seamlessly just says, I'll use what's there, and I'm interested in that journey with that conflicting journey with ballet.
Well, I don't bash ballet to in terms of what kind of tools it gives a dancer. I really don't bash ballet for that. It definitely is a technique. It's almost a science. And I think contemporary dance is actually almost a science as well. But for me, it was just so obviously, in South Africa when I was trying to find myself as a choreographer and a dancer, it was just so obvious that one didn't penetrate those places because it just smacked of colonization. That's not to say that the corps de ballet is not colonized in another sense, but in an apartheid sense. It was an art form that was only accessible to white people, and both audience and dancers. And it really brought the classics, the colonial classics, to South Africa, and it just kept on pushing that colonial cultural line that needed to be broken somehow. I think that you know, I think the new generation, you know, I think Dada's generation and the generation after Dada, I think it's very refreshing that they're saying, I will access whatever I want to access. And I can talk about, you know, working with moving into dance and working with the garage ensemble. I find this younger generation incredibly connected with who they are and accessing what they want. And all I can say is bravo to them. It wasn't
Do
something.
you think that's political, Robyn? Do you think that's a time like, I mean, apartheid, of course, when, you know, you and I were growing up, was this repressive, everything was hidden, everything was silent. There was complete state violence. Whereas it's not to assume that there isn't other kinds of sanctioned violence in our societies now, and state, you know, problems and stuff, but there is a freer sense of finding, of searching for self. And I'm
Well,
interested in that.
you know, I think this is not only in South Africa, you know, I think this is worldwide. Um, I just read recently that the majority of women in Germany are, if they fall pregnant, they are encouraged not to have an abortion. So there's none of this pro-choice, which makes a lot of sense in terms of, I think, the way women have to fight for their rights in Europe. But it is very political. It is very political. I mean, I was going to talk later about the garage ensemble. The dancers said to me, Robyn, we don't want to dance about issues. We're tired of issues. We just want to dance about ourselves. And I thought, phew, at long last. But then I said, but you know, that in itself becomes very political. So it's complicated. It's very, very complicated. You know, for Dada's generation and the generation afterwards, and probably the generation afterwards, there is nothing has really changed in South Africa. Woman violence is still on top of the list. Violence to women is still on top of the list. We might have a lot of women sitting in parliament, but we have one of the highest rates of rape in the world. So it's complicated. I mean, the real question is, if so, it's political, but is it resonating? Is it you know, is it shifting a culture? And the only way we can shift a culture is if we continuously go for the jugular. So, you know, we don't really have an option.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, because I mean, that going for the jugular is not often associated with being an artist, but I think it's something in South Africa we know, and I'm interested. That's why I'm interested to see what work is emerging now. What kind of, so for me, in a way, two things are happening in South Africa, perhaps in dance and theatre. One is that artists are becoming a little bit fearful of going for the jugular because there is such a lack of funding. And then the other is that there is a kind of return to imagined nostalgic ideas of tradition and culture, and reenacting, maybe sometimes quite badly, imagined rituals on stage without much research or without permission sometimes. And I'm interested in this because you've been an artist, for me, a kind of beacon of light as someone who's never unequivocally gone for the jugular, but in a way that also we can laugh and we can feel uncomfortable and we can get angry, because I know people get angry at your work as well. So that idea of being an artist who goes for the jugular, I mean, it's quite a position to have to take on.
It's a very difficult position. I mean, I've had similar when I did a piece on the Paris Opera, an opera, and the dancers eventually decided that they went on strike. They didn't want to work with me anymore because I was just. And I was, wow, this is so cool. The dancers are going on strike. And the artistic director at the time said, Robyn, you've given them too much freedom. And I said, no, it's fine. If they don't want to do this piece, I will work with the fact that they don't want to do this piece. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I think I've softened a bit in my old age. I need to celebrate the good things. But at the same time, still, I mean, the rickshaws, flying angels. I'd never seen, I was very young when I first saw a rickshaw, and I'd never seen such beauty. I'd never seen men fly in the air, and I didn't even think about what was at the back of their wagons, and that whole connotation. So for me, I had to find a way to celebrate the rickshaws, but not forget the history and not forget the slavery attached to the rickshaws. And it's now it's easy. It's possible for me to work with both, to do two things at the same time.
Beautiful. And also, I just want to say for those people who are listening in, Robyn's talking about the rickshaws because the work, we wear our wheels with pride and say bonjour to Satan.
And slap your streets with color.
That's it. Is the work that we're very grateful that you're bringing that work to Durban. And it's a work, of course, that is very much about Durban and bringing it home. So that's coming to Durban, to Jomba. Robyn, I want to ask you, it's a difficult question and it's an important question. And I know that you and I have spoken about it before. As a white South African choreographer, often you work with Black bodies. Your work often engages identities that are not your own. And it is a contentious and it's an interesting area of discussion around who we work with, how we work with, and I'm wondering, how you feel and how you navigate these kinds of intersectional body politics in your work and your art making.
Well, I mean, I've been criticized for making a piece about AIDS. I've been criticized as being a white woman from the northern suburbs. What does she know about AIDS? And I just say, fuck off, basically. So I'm probably not allowed to swear here.
Go for it.
I just, nobody owns history. AIDS is not spoken about enough in South Africa. And wasn't at the time when the epidemic was really bad, and I was shocked with how it was being dealt with. And it was affecting me. I was teaching at the laboratory at the Market Theatre. I was teaching the actors there, and every day somebody was missing. Where were they? They were going to a funeral to bury a relative, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother. Why? Silence. And I just, for me, it just didn't make sense. So yes, I might have been a white woman from the northern suburbs with not exactly the same kind of background as most white women from the northern suburbs, but it was affecting the school, the laboratory, and why shouldn't I talk about it? Why shouldn't the performers voice what they're going through? Um, uh, so I did it. I did it, and nobody owns history. Nobody owns history. If I'm a white woman, and if you can only see me as a white woman, that's your problem. It's not my problem.
Yeah. I think also, I asked that question because obviously, and we have spoken about it's something that I have faced as well. And I'm kind of, I'm interested also because what you're raising is the idea of how potentially those discourses can marginalize and silence rather than open up that space for a choreographer, an artist to kind of be maybe in a facilitator, a kind of way of opening up um, stories and knowledges and to take those spaces. So
yeah, I mean, I do see making work as a facilitation. I actually don't like to call myself a choreographer. But needless to say, I have to say this, that the piece failed because there were 3 people in the group that have since died, that died of AIDS. And I didn't know that they had AIDS. And it just shows you that the piece didn't work for them. They still were embarrassed about having the disease or having AIDS. I don't even think it's a disease. I think it's an illness. And that made me very sad. So I think it's a very delicate balance. Um, I also didn't hear when those 3 particular people said to me, "This is very good. We need to do this work." So they obviously used the work as a way to, but not be able to be totally okay about being sick.
yeah. And also the porous, I mean, listening to this is the porous sense of our identities, the race, gender, class, disability, nation, the fact that you have 2 feet in 2 worlds, that there's a constant interplay of identity. I like that idea that Mongeni raised of a skin that's porous, that allows the flowing of things through. And I think, that idea of fixing our sense of identity as just one thing, as just male or just transgender or just white or just it's kind of a dangerous violence in a way.
I think it's a very dangerous thing, but at the same time, there's a film festival here in Berlin, which is a trance film festival, and I go and see lots of those movies because I'm curious, and I think I'm always the only straight person in the audience, and I think to myself, why am I feeling this? But at the same time, trans people need that safe space to go and watch their movies. So it's double-sided. It's porous. It's double-sided, and one has to be very aware not to take these support structures away. Because as fragile as democracy is at the moment, we need to implement this way of thinking of openness.
Yeah. And how do you relate that to your own theatre making? I mean, yeah, I mean that kind of sense of being of understanding fragility and then understanding the desire to open out. because your work, you know, I remember as a young dancer, you know, looking at your work, and I remember there was always that contentious debate in the early 80s, is Robyn Orlin a choreographer or is she a performance artist? And I'm sure you don't care too much about how you are envisioned and what genre you do. You're a theatre maker, a performance maker. But that way of thinking about making theatre, I mean, I always think of you as one of the first people whose work I saw as a young, you know, student dancer and choreographer, who blew the concept of what dance could be out the water for me personally. For that, of course, I'm
And
always
for
grateful.
myself. And for
Yeah.
myself.
Okay. I mean, how did it start? I mean, you
I'll
know.
tell you how it started. I mean, I you know, I when I finished school, I started uni and I was doing sociology, psychology, English, and I thought, oh, fuck this is boring, you know. And I said to myself, what do you really want to do? And you know, I really wanted to dance. So off I went to the London School of Contemporary Dance on a scholarship, and had a fairly good training, you know, a very strong Graham background, fairly strong Cunningham, fairly strong Limon, had a taste of what was left of the Graham Empire, and knew the pitfalls of all of that. Came back to South Africa and realized there was no place for Diversion of Angels or Lamentation. Probably Lamentation would be the only piece that would really work in South Africa, but there was just no place for the training, for the day-to-day. It just, and that's what blew the lid off for me, you know, because there I was thinking, you know, I need to come back and start, you know, bring more colonial ideas. You know, I didn't realize I was bringing more colonial ideas, but it's uh, that started it for me. You know, that really started it for me.
And I mean, the other thing that always, I mean, everyone knows your titles are always extraordinary, and they are, I'm interested, the titles are, they're long, they're poetic, they are intriguing, they encourage a kind of questioning. And I'm wondering, in the actual making of your work, do you, those titles, do they come first as the work, you know, just kind of thinking about your process, do the titles come first and then the work, or do you start working and imagining and then what happens when you
Well,
start to work?
well, you know, it depends. I mean, when I did Beauty Returns, um, I knew that I wanted to find a discourse of what was beauty in the context of South Africa. And we started working. I started working with MID, and there was, I mean, for 2 weeks we didn't dance. We just spoke, and they were furious with me. But I was trying to find a thread that we could all hold on to and find a way to work with it, in terms of movement or theatrically or whatever way we chose to work. And it's just that I only found the title in the middle of the process, but I knew that the piece was about beauty. You know, what is beauty? The piece I'm doing now with Garage, I had before I started working with them. I did a workshop with them. I had a sense of the area and the group, and went away and did some research, and then came back and had a title. It I mean, I don't think I've ever started a piece with not knowing what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the title, and sometimes the title changes, and because the piece becomes more about something than just the title. And maybe that's why they're these long titles. Um, uh, You know, I'm always asked this about my titles. And, you know, the first time I started with long titles was when I did a piece on in Durban called If the Whole Population of China Jumped Up and Down at the Same Time, the Earth Would Move.
Yeah.
And I got that title from a chappie's chewing gum wrapper. But it resonates.
Yeah.
On
I
so
mean,
many
also on
levels.
that level, you know, the other thing that I have also, your engagement with also with popular culture and iconic stuff, you know, I mean, your work's been called iconic and ironic and in a way more performance than dance, you know, all those things that, you know, are maybe useful, maybe not useful. But I'm interested in these iconic kind of things that you use and that idea of that engagement with pop culture and unapologetically, you know, using a ballet company. I'm thinking of, you know, I think it was the NAPAC dance company that you might have made that work on. I think I remember seeing it.
Yes.
So unapologetically working with the high art dance companies and making them, you know, wear costumes that are unusual and witty and strange, and then bringing your ducks on stage, and this kind of what you know what I read, and that kind of chaos with a kind of political intent. So that engaging with popular culture, how, you know, is it just something that is in you or something that comes from walking around thinking about?
Well, I'm just not a purist. You know, I'm dyslexic, and I really struggle to read. And when I do read, I really have to read with pure concentration. And a lot of the time, it's so what's the word, tiring to have that concentration that I have to look at what's around me and work with that as well. Um, and um, and it's a very healthy way of being in the world, because, and this is no offense to you, but academia really is cut off from reality and from day-to-day living. The concepts are really difficult to work with in reality. I mean, that said, that's not really true, but it's for me, I'm talking about for me and my reading disabilities, I have to draw from other things. I can't um I can't just, I can't be in a vacuum.
Yeah. But I think also, you know, what you're saying is also you are so profoundly challenging academia and you know, and the idea of only being inwardly looking, and the idea of how does academia begin to interface with practice, and you know, and you know, I mean, for that, you know, grateful, and for the provocation of that. So thank you. I sort of wanted to ask you, no, it's important, and it's
I'm
why.
sorry, I don't mean to bash academia.
No,
I mean,
we would.
I sometimes wish I could just, you know, put myself on a campus and just study all the courses I want to study. And
But I think, like all, I mean, you know, not to kind of go divergently, but I think universities are absolutely in crisis because the idea of what constitutes knowledge is really under revision. And I think with AI, post-COVID, the idea of what constitutes meaning making is really under threat and under revision. And I think this is where artists become such embodied artists, become such profound vehicles of knowledge, and truthful or truth to power kinds of knowledge, you know. So bash away, really, you know. It's time we know it. Robyn, I wanted to ask you, you know, in terms of the title of this colloquium, the idea of, you know, returning to the drum, and the idea of looking at the way in which contemporary dance makers, you know, in Africa, but also globally, we don't want to only stick on the continent, but the idea in which, you know, for you, as you look at work, and I know you've spoken about some of the younger generations, but also for you, when you start to see the work that is, particularly the work that starts to travel to Europe, the South African work that starts to travel to Europe. And in light of the provocation of this kind of colloquium of us questioning how we go back to culture and tradition, you know, and I'm thinking particularly about that beautiful provocation from Bongeni Charlie, when he sort of said that, you know, instead of dancing against a drum or in time to a drum, the idea of dancing with the drum. And I'm interested in your sense of, because you know, your iconography is that you are reinventing tradition and culture from a kind of postmodern grabbing the ducks and the tutus, but it's all there in your work, but in a kind of different way. So say to the work of other choreographers whose work is particularly traveling to Europe. And I'm not sure what the question is, but I'm sort of asking, you know, in light of the provocation, you know, what are your thoughts around this notion of tradition and culture? And not only, you know, ballet is a tradition and culture, you know, the Paris Opera is a tradition and culture, you know, so just kind of asking you to reflect a little bit.
Oh, I need to be very clear that in an ideal world, when I make work with South Africans, I want the work to be seen in South Africa, and I can never find the money to get my work. I mean, you know how we looking in every nook and cranny to find funding to get my piece to the rickshaw piece to Durban, which is where it belongs. You know, I kept on saying to MID, we've got to get it to Durban. We've got to get it to Durban. I think you must have heard me somewhere. It's very difficult. It's very difficult, and I see the problem. I think a lot of the European audiences didn't quite understand what the rickshaw piece, how important the rickshaw piece meant to me, and a lot got lost. I mean, my work often goes to Spain. It never got invited to Spain, and I think the Spanish presenters didn't get it. But the work has traveled. I mean, it's traveled a lot, and it's been a very good experience sharing the work with different countries in Europe. I try not to make work that is for just one kind of audience. I don't know who an audience is. I really don't know. I just know that it's a group of people coming into the space to hear, to listen, to share what a piece is. And I'm not there to preach, and I'm not there to make an audience feel uncomfortable, and I am there to help them laugh at themselves. And I am there to help the dancers find a way to say what they want to say and be understood. So I mean, nothing in the rickshaw piece will change for a Durban audience or a Johannesburg audience. It is the piece that went to Europe and has finally come home. The piece I do with Garage now, it is not anything that I wouldn't do in South Africa or in Europe. I mean, yes, OKIP is a place that Europeans don't know about, and I have to find a way to let them know about it. But I will do it through the work. I will do it through the stories or through the images that we work with. The identity of coloureds in South Africa needs to be known, and historically how they've never been able to fit in into South African society. And it's not just during apartheid where they weren't white enough, and it's not just now where they're not black enough, but historically, even before, you know, in the Northern Cape, you know, the Khoi, San, the Nama, these things are very important to share with an audience, but it's how it gets shared. And it's a big concern for me because I'm not working for the South African Tourist Board. I would take money from them because I still think that the work that I'm doing is solid enough for people to want to come to South Africa and see for themselves. But what's more important for my work now is what has changed and what has not changed in South Africa, and how do we move forward? And a lot has not changed.
Yeah. It's sort of, it's shape shifted, but it's not changed in a way, right?
It's shape shifted, absolutely. I mean, the rickshaws, when I started working on the piece, there were 4 Zulus there are 4 Zulus in MID in the group. They didn't know about the rickshaws. And the worst thing is that the universities haven't been writing about the rickshaws. We had to go to an American university. And that for me is to find research. There was some sort of project that was done at the Natal School of Art or Design, where the designs were important, but not actually. I mean, we need to put our past to rest, and in doing that, we have to acknowledge that yes, the rickshaws were very beautiful and full of design, but they were slaves. It came out of apartheid. It's something that we have to talk about. And own.
Yeah, and that kind of co-option of, in a way, ironically, the tourist co-option of something that is has a very problematic history. I can't wait. I mean, I've seen parts of the work and I've seen it on video, but it's going to be just really beautiful to have you here. Robyn, I mean, we're sort of almost running a little bit out of time. We've got a few more minutes, but I wanted to ask you in the remaining...
Are we not talking for the day?
No, sadly not. But I wanted to know, in your own, you know, just personally, in your own history and lexicon of work that you've made, is there any work that particularly you hold dear as a work that sits with your heart, you know?
Well, you know, Daddy is, I just, you know what, since I started making Daddy, since I made Daddy, I just loved working with Tony Morkel, Gerard Bester, Nelly Siwe, Dudu, who's no longer with us. In fact, since Daddy, all the pieces I've made, I've really enjoyed making. I have fun. Yes, they're difficult pieces. I mean, even the piece that went to Cape Town with the puppets, with handspring puppets, I really enjoyed making that piece. And I like making work. I like working with performers. I like the discourse. I have recently, just before COVID, I directed a theatre piece, and I really enjoyed that, and I want to do that again. I did The Maids. And I really want to, I just want to, as difficult as it is to make work, and it is difficult to make work. And what's even more difficult is the vipers around after you've made the work. But I just want to carry on making work for as long as I can. And laughing. I laugh so much now when I make work. It's so funny. I love working with the other artists that, you know, just facilitating and creating proposals.
Yeah. And I mean, I think in a way, listening to you speak, you're also an artist that works very much with who's in the room, that there's not, you know, that the work also emerges from, and I know you've worked a lot in the South African context with moving into dance, which is really interesting.
They're a great group of dancers.
They are indeed.
Sylvia's really given them a legacy to work with.
Yeah. And so the work that you'll bring with Jomba, of course, is also shared with MID. So that's also for us really
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes.
And I know you've mentioned a little bit about the Garage Dance Ensemble, Alfred's project down in the Eastern Cape. Can you tell us just a little bit more about the work? It's, you know, it's fascinating and it's beautiful. I think it's already been performed. Am I right?
No, 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 no,
Okay.
no, no. I go in a week's time. We have a residency in Toulouse for a week, and then we open in Marseille. We open the festival in Marseille with it. Um, it's, I mean, I think Alfred and the dancers are just great. You know, what they do and how they survive is just an immense, gives me such joy to see that people still work with what they want to do. You know, you know, it's not a day job, or it's not money for jam. It's their profession. As the same for moving into dance. And the younger, you know, Dada, everybody's now very serious about and Greg. It's a piece about how to survive in the semi-desert, and in particularly in Okip. And it's something that happens in the vegetation, and it's something that happens with the people. My impression of being in the area and coming from Johannesburg, I don't think I've ever really I've been to the Northern Cape as a child, but I don't think I've ever really experienced as an adult that part of South Africa. Botswana maybe, but not. And there's something so mysterious and something so mythical about the area. You cannot pinpoint it. And I had that feeling working with the dancers, that it's something so intangible yet so tangible. And that's what I'm you know, trying to that's what we've been working with. I hope we bring it to Jomba at some point.
I hope so. I mean, also, you know, Alfred defied the odds, you know, and
oh, he's amazing. Him and John are just amazing.
They're extraordinary, and also that, I mean, I know with Byron Parsons, also the kind of way in which they're completely pushing a new generation of dance makers. And
well, yeah, they see it. I mean, you know, it was our role, you know, in the olden days, it was our role to educate, to teach, to help the younger generations to aspire to maybe something better, but to aspire not to what we were, but to aspire to be their own artist.
Yeah. And essential in this day and age where there is so much, I don't know, where I feel like the funding environment, and I know it's a longer conversation, but I feel like in many ways in South Africa, it's a reflection I have that the funding environment is not conducive to deeply critical work, because there's so little funding and there's such a pull for it, you know, that there is, I think artists are sometimes making safe choices. And I don't know, I kind of think back to the kind of radical theatre making that was coming out of this country. And I'm not saying that nostalgically, but I'm wondering and I'm looking for where those voices are now, you know?
I think there is, I mean, I think there are some the younger generations that are trying to be more radical. I appreciate what is being done, but it's important. I've lost you, but I don't know why.
I'm
It's
here.
okay. It's important to um, uh, to not just be a title, to not just be an idea, but to go through a process where you can allow the idea to change, where you can allow yourself to be honest with what you're doing. We have to stick to that. You know, it's very important
Well,
that
that's the art, isn't it? It's also the craft of
yeah.
it's choreography is not a title. It's a kind of, I
Well,
don't know.
art is not a title. Art is not a title. You know, I mean, I hate to just look at dance. I'm looking at things on a much bigger level, broader level, not bigger, broader level, because it's all art. You know, it's how we make work, why we make work. Just I have to say this, and I know we have to finish, but performance art doesn't exist. It's not called performance art anymore. It's called live art. It's called that for a very specific reason. It's about working with theory and putting it into a performative situation because you don't want to paint about it or sculpt about it or design it. There's the performing arts, yes.
Yeah.
But performance art doesn't exist. That phrase doesn't exist anymore. And I think that this is great.
Yeah.
Because I think dance is live art as well.
Robyn, I'm sorry that our time has come to an end. It's been the most beautiful hour. I always love talking to you, and
Me too.
I'm so delighted that we found a way to get you to Durban, and also, of course, to Johannesburg at the Jomba at the Market Theatre. I think it's a long time since you've been at the Market Theatre. When was the
Very
last?
long time. I think
Yeah,
the last time I was there about 7 years ago with In a World Full of Butterflies. Yeah.
yeah. So, and also so grateful that the rickshaw work comes to Durban, where its home
Oh,
is, and
me too.
thank you, Robyn, on behalf of the
Thank you.
CPA and Jomba. Just what a pleasure to have this time with you. And I know that there are comments in the chat, and you know, but we've sort of run out of time, so I'm not going to reflect on those. But if you are in the room and if you do come and watch, you know, listen to some of the other dialogues, we can engage you again. But thank you for the hour, and yeah, thank you for being a beacon of light and just for being the artist that goes to the jugular and still finds a sense of humor. So I really thank you.
Have to have a sense of humor. Have to. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you, Robyn.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.